Today, I'm at the Colchester Historeum Museum and Archives, and I'm speaking with Joanne Hunt, who is the archivist here at the museum. And I must say, Joanne, this is a beautiful, beautiful building. Now, perhaps you can tell me a little bit about the history of the building and how the museum and archives came to be.
Certainly. Welcome to the archives and the museum. Sandy, we're pleased to have you here, and this is a beautiful building. It was the science building of the Normal College, which opened in 1855. This particular building didn't come to be until 1901. The architects were Elliott and Hobson from Halifax, and it was built by the Reed and Sons builders that came from Windsor. So there were people from away that came to town to build it using Amherst sandstone. The building is a beautiful example of Beaux-Arts architecture, which is very symmetrical.
So a lot of the industrial things would have come from Amherst, because I don't think most of our viewers realize that at this particular time, Amherst was the industrial center of Nova Scotia.
Yes, that's true. And the society itself was started in 1954 by L.A. DeWolf, who was a professor here and taught. He and his colleagues had a great interest in history. Unfortunately, he only lived about 5 years till his passing, and the society at that point had become just a group of teachers and interested parties who would get together and listen to lectures and historical topics. They also started collecting artifacts and records. So that's when the collection began. So really next year is going to be 70 years worth of collecting for us, which makes an awful lot of memorabilia to have and to house and catalog, but we love sharing it with the public. And going back to the history, it was 1976 when this building became available. It was no longer being used as a science building. It had become vacant. So some volunteers then took this building over, renovated it, and made it into the historical museum that you see today. I generally work on the second floor, which is the archives, and we'll talk about that later.
That sounds like very solitary work.
It is, but people come from all over to visit us, especially in the summer. We have a lot of New England guests that come because of the planter connections that are here. Our museum does include over 20,000 artifacts, over 10,000 photographs. We have maps, a lot of genealogy. So we love to share that with people. And our history does go back, of course, to include First Nations, also Acadian history, and the planter history, which is the first settlers of Truro and area. But we are Colchester, so we try our best to represent everywhere from Five Islands through Great Village, over to Tatamagouche, to Stewiacke, and of course, most things did culminate in Truro because it's known as the hub. And because of the trains that came through town, which is another big part of Truro, that part, of course, is embedded deeply into our history.
Now, you mentioned the planters. Perhaps you could tell me who the planters were?
The planters are basically colonists, although people say, did they plant? Yes, a lot of them were farmers, but not all. They were Ulster Scots, or those from Northern Ireland, who came here, largely Presbyterian, and they were the first to come to our shores and settle this area. So they were given lots of land after the Acadians were deported in 1755. The area here, the lots and the land stayed vacant for about 5 years. There was also a very large hurricane in that time frame, which destroyed some of the dikes and whatnot even further. But around 1760-61 is when some military men who were given large plots of land here were told by the British to populate the area. So they advertised in New England and elsewhere to have new settlers come here in hopes of they will stay, they will farm, and they would have new communities. And Truro was one of them.
Now, these artifacts, we're finding as we go through museums throughout Nova Scotia and the Maritimes, that local people are very involved. Now, a lot of this, was this donated by local people?
Yes, all of it was donated by local people. So it's a vast collection, everything to do from education through to the train period. Some of our oldest artifacts would be the Acadian sluice that we have. as well as a special little book that's called the Mary Miller Book. And it's a songbook that was brought by a young girl from Ireland. So it's a special little collection piece.
Now, as an archivist, do you get a lot of requests in terms of genealogy? People who
Yes.
come, I say, from away. That's a quaint Nova Scotia expression, from away. I think in
Yes.
New England they call them summer people, right?
Yes.
But when they come from away, they want to know the roots. You know, they might be a first or second or third generation in Ontario or Toronto, but the roots are Maritime. Do you
Yes.
get a lot of requests for those?
We do. I spend about 60% of my time on the internet talking to people who unfortunately can't visit us. They are from away. Last month I had people from Japan, from Korea, Netherlands. I've talked to people from Switzerland. They come here, some of them, they do make a long-range trip, so they're making plans, and I often get research done for them ahead of time. So when they arrive, because their time is limited, they can sit down, look at what I found, and go from there. And they usually have more questions. So it's fun to talk to people from all over.
Joanne, perhaps you could tell me a little bit about the collection, what people can expect to see here, and secondly, what's your favorite in terms of the collection?
Well, our main exhibit area highlights the life in the heart of Colchester, and it does cover many of the most popular things that you would see in Truro and area. Of course, we cover our military background, our education background, which is very vast, with the library next door, which has been all redone. But the planter history, of course, we have many artifacts concerning them. We have the Acadians, that's part of our collection as well. Then the trains and commerce. So far as a favorite artifact, I have a lot of them actually. I love things that sort of have moving parts on them, and there are some adding machines and some old cash registers, typewriters, those types of things really catch my eye, as well as some artistic things like the Mary Miller Book, which is hand-drawn and whatnot in the archives. I love maps, so there's a lot of those to choose from. I don't think I could pick just one.
Well, perhaps we can go and have a look at the archives. So would you mind? Let's go have a look.
All right, great. Well, Sandy, here we are up in the archives, the second floor of the Colchester Historeum, where I spend most of my days here, happily doing genealogy and searching for things for people, for our guests. And here I have Ryan McClellan, who is our intern this year, here on a special grant, and he is digitizing the school records of our county.
So the grant is called a Documentary Heritage Communities Program, and it's a federal grant that provides funding to institutions across Canada to preserve their holdings and to make their holdings more accessible. So for me, it's school records. We have in our holdings about 16,000 school records from the whole of Colchester County. They go from 1860s to up to the 1980s. So I actually just pulled out the oldest one we have here. This is from 1869, I believe, and it's from Great Village. And you can open it up and see. These old ones are pretty bare bones, but as you get into the older ones, this is from 1922, you'll see that not only do they have a list of students' names, they also have their precise ages, and they have their parents' names and where they lived. So in a sense, these are important genealogical tools in the same way that marriage registers are and birth certificates and death certificates.
Well, I suspect that it's important that these not be lost because, you know, being paper, they will deteriorate. So once you've digitized them, will you put them in storage?
Yes, so they're going out of their old crummy boxes that they've been in for a long, long time and into new boxes. They're going to be wrapped in acid-free paper so that they're not exposed to the acidic boxes. And yeah, they're just going to be preserved as well as we can. We can't reverse the aging of any of our archival records, but we can try to slow down the process.
Well, if you could reverse aging, you'd have a much bigger, bigger place, believe me. Right? You have me first in line. But I have to say that's a wonderful thing you're doing, digitizing all this, because I'd hate to see that these would be lost.
So would I. Yeah.
Well, Joanne, I see you have some interesting artifacts and information out on the table. Perhaps you could tell me a little bit about it.
Yes, well, I wanted to show you some of the things that we have up here in the archives. Of course, we have a lot of literature that has been written by our historians locally, as well as collected books. Our archive library is available for patrons to come and use, but it's not like a regular library. They can't sign the books out. They stay here. Some of the planters and grantee books, which I mentioned, this is a 2-volume set, very special. It took over 10 years of research to basically write about every planter family that came to the area. So there's something about everyone, and there are research files are also kept here. Carol Campbell and James Smith sat in this room. I met them over 10 years ago when I first came here, and I listened to them. They were my teachers, so it's an honor to be here and to pass on what they have shared with us. As well, for the normal college, they also wrote this book on the provincial normal school, and they followed the graduates of the first 15 years, where they went in the world, what they did. And it's an amazing read to see where everyone went, from doctors, lawyers, first women in different fields, missionaries and whatnot. So it's a great collection to have, and it leads me on to this picture, which is a sample picture of the many, many classes that graduated from the provincial normal school. Way down by the T in Truro is a picture of my grandmother. So she went here and graduated in 1924, which makes it even more special to have that connection.
That is important, because we're finding with the museums is that you can have wonderful artifacts, but it's always the story that draws people.
It's the story.
It's almost as if you could feel the ghost.
Yeah, it is. There's a real connection when you get those stories. Their sea captain that's in this particular book happens to be my own great-grandfather here. There's a picture of him with my father as a youngster. And that gives a different story again. So I have many connections in the area, and that really has spurred my interest in history. So much more. I wish I'd asked more questions when I was young. My grandparents lived to be in their 90s, and they were great at giving me information, but I have so many more questions now, and unfortunately they're not around anymore. So I guess if I could give one bit of advice to people, it's ask those that are still here. Someday you may want that information, and you wish you could have asked.
Yeah, you're right. And that's why archives are important, so that these stories continue.
That's right.
Because in the end, our stories are going to be in an archive somewhere, right?
We hope so, yes. You never know.
And as I say, I look at these photographs, and I see, it's 100 years later, right? This is 1921. They just come through a great war. They just come through the worst pandemic in history. Mm-hmm. And now they're all gathered. So you want to think, what was in their minds when they're doing this? Had they lost somebody? Mm-hmm. Were some of them in the war?
That's right. Yeah, we really cherish the collections that come in our door that connect Colchester in particular. We are all things Colchester here, mainly due to space. Plus there are other, of course, museums in all the counties in Nova Scotia that collect their own things close to home.
We're a province of storytellers.
We are.
Well, Joanne, I must say I really love doing this. I really do. But I also understand that you have a notable collection in regards to women.
Yes. Currently, we do have special women that were featured in the Colchester Women book, which was put together by a committee quite a number of years ago, several decades ago. It has been revamped and upgraded, and new publications come out, but we took 13 of those women and featured them. Only one, however, was still living that was featured in the show. She is our first curator here at the museum, and her name is Frances Langell. And this past weekend, we opened the show, and we featured her with cake and tea and a lovely get-together. So she was most honored to be here, and we were honored to have her.
Do you think I can have a look at that?
Sure can. We can go back downstairs.
Let's do it. Thank you, Joanne, and thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Joanne, here we are in what looks like an exhibit depicting the contributions of the women of Colchester.
Yes, Sandy. This is a temporary exhibit, which often happens here at the Historeum. It's put together by staff and volunteers, and we work together to both highlight the artifacts that are in our collection, and we collect them from outside, so from family members, which was the case for this. It was inspired by a book called Colchester Women, this one here. And we have it in our gift store to purchase, and it features many, many women. It was written in the 70s, and then it was updated again in the 90s. So these 13 women, we have the first woman who is an optometrist in Nova Scotia, as well as those in education, those of wartime, the Senator Norrie, who was the first woman in that position. So they did hold important roles, and it was through their challenges that we, of our generations, have learned many things.
Now, it tends to be, for example, people forget that, I'm not quite sure, but I think in Canada, the suffrage was 1920, I believe.
Yes.
1920. And then prior to that, you had women who were working 7 days a week in the factories during the First World War, and then finally they've got the vote in the 1920s, but it was still a very difficult times. I mean, for example, higher education, becoming a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. For many instances, these professions were closed to women.
That's true. So they were pioneers in many fields, and for that we are grateful for their contributions. And as I said, these are mainly Colchester women, so it has to do with things in our area, but women everywhere. I mean, these types of exhibits are important for us to learn a lot.
And so the 13 women that are in this exhibit, they contributed directly to Colchester.
They did. They did in many ways.
And could you tell me a couple of examples?
Well, as I said, there's our first optometrist in Nova Scotia, and we have some interesting artifacts in her case. They came to us quite by accident. Actually, not long ago, a young couple who had purchased an old home in Truro came into the archives looking for information about their house and mentioned that in the basement they had found some documents, some diplomas of a Ruth Stoddard, which perked my ears up because we had heard of her before. And she was the first optometrist in Nova Scotia. And I said, we'd be really keen to see those diplomas. So they came in and they have contributed them to this exhibit. So it was totally by accident that those things are on view today for our public.
It's strange how these things almost like the ghost is directing you to them to come and get them, right?
Very much so, yes, yes.
And I see other things. For example, I'm seeing one of the exhibits for a nurse's uniform for Rebecca Campbell. It looks like about the First World War.
Yes, and a first aid uniform as well there. And Doris McCabe also was in war duties. And Helen Beveridge was an artist. We have Jane Norman, who is an educator and started a college here in Truro. We have Senator Norrie. We have those from our Indigenous community as well as our African Nova Scotian community.
Now you say these change, or is this going to be a permanent exhibit? Or?
This part is not a permanent exhibit. This is one of our temporary exhibits. So I'm not sure how long it will be up. We do extend them numerous months at a time, so hopefully people are able to drop by and see it, and if not, they're going to see something else that we'll put in its place.
Well, it is a good idea too, because very often the contributions of women tend to be overlooked.
That's true. That's true. So that's what inspired us. We said, hey, let's talk about our women here. So.
And I agree with that. And when you opened the exhibit, were there any family members here, and what was the reaction to seeing, you know, a grandmother or a great-grandmother?
It was a very warm reception. We featured Frances Langell, who was our Lady of the Day. She was our one living person who is featured in this show. She's 94 and came and spoke to our guests that were there as well, and we had a few speakers who spoke of her. She was our first curator here at the museum in the 1970s, so she was a real inspiration for me, for countless others who have come afterwards, and she's a lovely lady, really, really special.
Feisty?
Yes, very smart lady. She has a lot of energy still at 94. It was amazing, and it was lovely to meet her.
And the families, like, for example, they didn't know that their grandmother or their great-grandmother had this kind of life?
Well, many knew, but I think it's always nice to see one of your family members on display. You know, people were very proud to see the photographs and the artifacts together, telling their family story to other people. So, yeah, it was definitely a lovely day.
And, you know, sometimes at a certain age, it's hard for you to imagine your parents or your grandparents were actually young like you.
That's right. It is.
Well, Joanne, I want to thank you and Ryan. You've been wonderful hosts today, and it's a beautiful, remarkable museum and archives, and I hope you get tons of visitors this summer.
We hope so too. Thanks so much for coming.
You're welcome. Our pleasure.